And hello, everyone. Happy Thursday to you, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another edition of the M&E Thursday Talks. By now, you know them as the best, most innovative, and greatest learning webinar there is in peace building evaluation field. Just in case you've forgotten, my name is Jack Farrell, and I am the DME for Peace project manager at Search for Common Ground in Washington, D.C. Today, I am delighted to welcome Salah of the Immigration Policy Lab, who is going to lead a discussion on the Mo Salah effect. Can exposure to celebrities reduce prejudice? Just a note, if you have a question during today's webinar, you can write your question on the question function on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we will address it as soon as we reach the question and answer section of today's webinar. I'm now going to hand over to today's guest. Salah, you are very welcome to the Thursday Talks. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Jack, so much for inviting us to present. This is a great opportunity and we really appreciate it. So as you all know, this is a research project about the effect of Mo Salah, the Liverpool soccer player, on Islamophobia. And this is a research by the Immigration Policy Lab at Stanford University. I want to start by acknowledging my co-authors, Will Marble, Selma Musa, and Alexandra Siegel. They all do incredible work and you should definitely look up their work. So today I'll be having a brief introduction about Mo Salah and the reason we decided to do this project. I'll talk a bit about the contact and prejudice literature and some of the predictions from that literature. And then I will dive into our research, our analyses. So that's an analysis of hate crimes in the UK after Salah joined, anti-Muslim tweets, and the survey experiment that we conducted before concluding. So who is Salah? So Mohamed Salah is an Egyptian soccer player. He plays with Liverpool FC and he joined Liverpool 2 seasons ago. And since he joined Liverpool, he's been playing incredibly well. So he was the top scorer in the Premier League in the 2017-2018 season and again in the 2018-2019 season. He was the best player in the Premier League in his first season. He helped Liverpool reach the final of the Champions League in 2017-2018, although they lost in the final to to Real Madrid. But they reached the final again this past season and they won it against Tottenham. And he led Egypt to the 2018 World Cup, which was Egypt's first time participating in the World Cup since, I believe, 1990. So he's been a really incredible player, especially in the last 2 seasons since he joined Liverpool. So why did we decide to conduct this study on his effect on Islamophobia? So this shows a song, a chant by Liverpool fans. They started singing this in the 2017-2018 season. And they were singing, if he scores another few, then I'll be Muslim too. If he's good enough for you, he's good enough for me. Sitting in a mosque, that's where I want to be. And this is not, so I've been watching European soccer, European football for a long time. And this is not something we generally expect from fans to sing things like, I'll be Muslim too, sitting in a mosque, that's where I want to be. And especially in the current atmosphere. So, you know, we, like in the UK, for example, there was an increase in hate crimes, an increase in prejudice toward Muslims. So this is not something we expected. So this is one of the main reasons we decided to do this project. The other thing is there was a lot of media speculation about the Salah effect. So this shows some titles from like news articles. Basically, one is Mo Salah of Liverpool breaks down cultural barriers 1 goal at a time, or Mo Salah, an Arab Muslim sports star, subtly confronting racism and Islamophobia. He's tackling Islamophobia head on. So there was a lot of speculation in the media, but the evidence was largely anecdotal. So we decided to conduct a rigorous study to examine his effect, if any, on Islamophobia. So the research question, so we're social scientists, the research question has to be somewhat general. So this is, can exposure to celebrities reduce prejudice? And in this case specifically, has exposure to Mohamed Salah reduced Islamophobic behaviors and attitudes? So we look at both. And just briefly, I want to talk about some of the related literature with contact and prejudice. So there's a lot of literature on contact and prejudice, and it started like relatively early on. In recent years, there have been a lot of experiments, but generally, like some of the findings from this literature is that contact tends to reduce prejudice when it is positive, when it is endorsed by communal authorities, when the two groups have a common goal, when it involves a two-sided interaction, so that's contact and how it differs from exposure. It involves a two-sided interaction, and when it is egalitarian, and when it involves cooperation rather than competition between the groups. But in this case, exposure of Liverpool fans to Mohamed Salah, it has been largely positive. He's done a lot to the club. It is endorsed by what we think of as the communal authorities. So that's the club management, the coach, and so on. And he has a common goal with Liverpool fans. They both want Liverpool to do well, to succeed. But it doesn't really involve much of a two-sided interaction between Salah and the fans. We don't really think of it as egalitarian. And it doesn't involve at least direct cooperation. It's definitely not a competition, but it doesn't really involve direct cooperation. So it makes it a bit hard to generate a prediction here. So some of the findings from this literature, so the literature looks at both contact and exposure. So contact is with real people, and the finding is that contact tends to be positive. It tends to reduce prejudice. So this, for example, this includes like roommates or teammates, and my co-author Salma Musa has really incredible research on how contact, basically being in the same soccer team, for example, across different groups can really reduce prejudice. Exposure, though, exposure usually to strangers, by itself, it tends to have a negative effect. So it tends to increase prejudice. So, for example, sharing a subway car with like migrants or refugees. There are like many other examples. A lot of studies conducted in Europe and show that exposure tends to have a negative effect. So it tends to increase prejudice. Exposure sometimes can be to non-real people, to fictional people. So there have been some online role-playing games that were designed, for example, like imagine you're a refugee, you're arrived to this country, you're new here, what would you want to do, or something like this. And there's some evidence that this actually leads to a positive effect, so that it reduces prejudice. But in this case, the Salah case is different, right? It's not contact, which is two-way. It's really exposure to a person. It's exposure to a real person, but it's not a stranger. Like people are familiar with Salah. So, we cannot really use the existing literature to predict the effect of Mo Salah on Islamophobia in this case. So what we do is, this is our research design. So we conduct 3 complementary analyses. The first thing we do is we analyze administrative data on hate crimes in the UK. Then we analyze anti-Muslim tweets by UK soccer fans. And finally, we conduct an original survey experiment of Liverpool fans in the UK. So the first part is hate crimes. So what we did here was we filed freedom of information requests to all UK police jurisdictions, and we asked for monthly hate crime data between January 2015 and April 2018. The reason it ends in April 2018 is that's when we filed the freedom of information requests. We weren't able to get usable data from all jurisdictions. We got it from most jurisdictions, but this basically gave us 936-month county observation. So a county generally or roughly corresponds to a jurisdiction in the UK. So we have 936-month county observations. So this is a tiny bit technical. So I'll explain here how we conducted the research specifically. So our goal was to predict what hate crime rate would have been like in Merseyside. Merseyside is the county that contains Liverpool. So we wanted to understand what it would have been in Merseyside if Salah had not joined. So that's the counterfactual. And we want to compare it to what actually happened, to the actual hate crimes in Merseyside after Salah joined. So to generate this counterfactual prediction, we used this method called matrix completion method. And the counterfactual prediction is what hate crimes would have been in Liverpool or in Merseyside if Salah had not joined Liverpool FC. So the way this method works is we find a combination of control units. The control units are other counties in the UK aside from Merseyside. We find a combination of these units that match the pre-treatment trends in Merseyside. So that match hate crime data in Merseyside before Salah joined. And then we use this combination to predict the unobserved counterfactual outcomes, which is to predict what would have happened in Merseyside if Salah had not joined. Because this combination is very similar to Merseyside before Salah joined, we can use it to predict what would have happened if Salah had not joined. And then we basically compared the predicted and the actual hate crimes to get the treatment effect estimate, to get the effect of Salah on hate crimes. So this shows the results basically of the matrix completion method. The black line here is hate crimes in Merseyside. This is the annualized hate crime rate. And after the gray thing here, this is when, like after Salah joined. So the black line here is hate crimes in Merseyside before Salah joined. This is after Salah joined. The dashed blue line is hate crimes in counties, in other counties in the UK, not Merseyside, that look very similar in the pre-treatment period before Salah joined to hate crimes in Merseyside. So as you can see here, the trends look very similar before Salah joined. And then we essentially used this to predict what would have happened in Merseyside if Salah had not joined. And the difference between these two is the effect of Salah on hate crimes. So this difference here is basically a reduction of, on average, 18.9% in hate crimes. So this is what we attribute to Salah. This is the Salah effect, a reduction in hate crimes in the UK by over 15%, almost 20%. The second analysis that we conduct is anti-Muslim tweets. So what we did here was we scraped the timelines of 10,000 followers of each of Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Manchester United, and Everton. So these first 5 teams are the top followed team on Twitter in the Premier League. Everton is also a prominent club, but the reason we chose it is because it's also based in Liverpool, so it's very close. So overall, we scraped 60,000 followers from these clubs. These followers are old, so we basically chose them to have been following these clubs before Salah has joined. And what we do, we get the IDs for these followers, like overall 60,000 followers from all these clubs, and we scrape their timelines. So this gives us 15 million tweets overall. And then we basically did a keyword search. We found tweets about Muslims. Overall, those were 44,000, and then we coded these tweets into anti-Muslim or not. And then we used the matrix completion method to impute the counterfactual in the post-treatment period. So essentially what we have here is we know trends in anti-Muslim tweets among Liverpool fans, and what we did is a similar method to before to predict what would have happened to Liverpool fans and their anti-Muslim tweets if Salah had not joined Liverpool. So it's just the same method as before. And this shows the results again. So again, the black line here, these are anti-Muslim tweets among Liverpool fans. The dashed blue line is anti-Muslim tweets among fans of other clubs that before Salah joined tended to tweet it very similarly in terms of anti-Muslim tweets to Liverpool fans. And then this diversion here shows the treatment effect. So this is after Salah joined, and what we're finding is roughly a 50%, 48% drop in the proportion of anti-Muslim tweets among Liverpool fans compared to what they would have been had Salah not joined. So the third thing we did was a survey experiment. And this really was to understand the specific mechanism through which Salah may have reduced Islamophobia. So what we did here was we advertised a survey over Facebook to target people who like Liverpool FC page and who live in the UK. Overall, we got a bit over 8,000 respondents. The median respondent was male, 54 years old, high school educated, and white. And we had a survey experiment here. So it was a factorial design. People were randomly assigned to one of the following groups. One is a pure control group, so they didn't receive any treatment. One received a treatment telling them that Muhammad Salah is successful, and another one describing his religiosity. And I'll show you an example of these treatments now, and happy to talk about this more in the Q&A. Another group received the same treatment that Muhammad Salah is successful, but really emphasized his character rather than his religiosity. Another group was told that Muhammad Salah is not successful anymore. And we basically conducted this early in the 2018-2019 season, when there was a tiny bit of criticism that Salah, was a one-season wonder and so on. So we tried to tell people, he had an amazing season last season, but this season he's not that successful anymore. And also emphasized his religiosity. And then the final combination of treatments was that he's not successful and he has a nice character. And we really used these success, failure, religiosity, character from a lot of media reports, basically, it's because of his religiosity, no, it's because of his success, and so on. So that's how we generated these treatments. So this shows an example, the religiosity treatment. So basically, in addition, what we tell people, we show them this picture of him praying. We tell them, in addition to his goal scoring, he's known for attachment to Muslim identity. He touches his head to the ground in prayer. He fasts in Ramadan. He cares about Islamic holidays. His daughter is called Mecca after Islam's holy site. So this is how we emphasize religiosity. This shows the results of the treatment. So basically, we had a few outcomes. One is the extent to which respondents felt they have in common with Muslims. The impact of immigrants on the UK, so this is not about Muslims per se. The extent to which they thought that Islam is compatible with British values, and then this is an index outcome of these three. And the one where we really had an effect is on this outcome: Islam is compatible with British values. So basically, both religion treatments, whether it was success or failure, seem to increase the likelihood that people say Islam is compatible with British values compared to the pure control group. And then this zooms in on this religion treatment, and so it combines both success and failure. And once again, what we're finding is it increases this by roughly 5%, 5 percentage points compared to people who receive the control group. So it seems to basically be working through religion, though this is debatable. So I don't want to take too long, but some final points here. So essentially, our findings are Muhammad Salah seems to have reduced, him joining Liverpool seems to have reduced hate crimes in Merseyside by over 15%. When it comes to the interpretation, we weren't sure, in the beginning, we weren't sure if, this is just because it's a happier fan base, because Liverpool is finally doing super well. And when Liverpool is doing super well, fans are just generally happy. And so they're less likely to conduct crimes in general. But so what we did here was we looked at the effect on other crimes, and I have this in additional slides, so I have to discuss more in Q&A. But there's no effect on other crimes. It's really just hate crimes that seem to be consistently decreasing after Salah joins. So what we think this is due is reduce prejudice toward Muslims, basically. We think this is what's driving this effect. Though keep in mind that hate crimes are social acts. So it's possible that Salah actually reduced prejudice among bigots, among people who are likely to conduct hate crimes, or he just made the average citizen more likely to basically oppose Islamophobia. So he made Islamophobia more stigmatized in Merseyside or in Liverpool. So we can't really tell what is the reason here. What we also found is that anti-Muslim tweets decreased by roughly 50% among Liverpool fans. And the survey experiment seems to suggest that the explanation is Salah has made an explicit link to Muslim practices, basically fans are making an explicit link between Salah and Muslim practices. So in conclusion, what we're finding here is exposure might reduce prejudice when it is positive, when it links the public figure to the outgroup, or at least when it provides new information about the outgroup's practices for people who may not be familiar with it. I want to emphasize, though, that so many celebrities take positions on issues and so on, and we don't really understand the full effect of this. So this is one of the earliest research projects about the effect of celebrities on prejudice. So we definitely need much more research on this topic to establish the conditions under which exposure to celebrities or contact with celebrities may reduce prejudice. And thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Allah, thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. I say that as someone who works in our research and evidence field, but is also a massive football fan. So I really appreciate you taking the time today, particularly given the success and popularity of this research paper. To our audience, thank you for your patience. We're now going to open up today's presentation to your questions. A couple of notes about our format for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Thursday Talks. You can submit a question in two ways. The first is through the question function on your GoToWebinar dashboard where you can type your question. The second is to click on the little hand button on your GoToWebinar dashboard, which will raise your hand and allow me to unmute your microphone so you can ask your question live. Just a note that when you do submit your question, we ask that you submit your name and affiliation. And these talks are recorded and posted on the DME for Peace Media Gallery, so that those who are not able to join us today could go back and listen to the presentation and the discussion. So Alaa, I'm going to use my moderator's privilege here and just build off the last point that you made on more research on the effect of celebrities needed. One of the interesting things I took from your research was the effect of, or the discussion of Colin Kaepernick on sort of negative and how it negatively affected people's attitudes. And then also the fact that Sadio Mane, another Liverpool player who's incredibly successful, who's outwardly Muslim, hasn't had the same effect. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more, particularly as there are quite a few Americans online today, about Colin Kaepernick and that sort of negative element.
Yeah, for sure. So this is an excellent question. And honestly, like, we do not have the data to answer this. Like, we can speculate a bit, and we do that in the paper. But we basically think that essentially Colin Kaepernick, or some celebrities in general, like, they've become really politicized. They take some controversial decisions and they become really politicized. And this also corresponds to sometimes negative media coverage. So in the Salah case, you know, like, he's not somebody who's going out there telling people, like, you know, you should, I don't know, convert to Islam or something. He's just being who he is. And we think that this is actually having a really powerful effect. I'm not saying that, like, Kaepernick is not having an effect, or definitely having a negative effect. I haven't, like, seen a study that actually examines this, but essentially he's a controversial, politicized figure, which Salah has not. And the media coverage hasn't all been positive. There has been a lot of negative media coverage. For Salah, like, these two aren't really true. So this is what we speculate, basically, but we do not have the data to answer this. Did you also want me to talk about Sadio Mane?
Yeah, if you could just elaborate a bit on Sadio Mane. For people online that don't know, Sadio Mane is a Senegalese footballer who is incredibly talented, plays in a very similar position to Mohamed Salah, celebrates his goals by making Muslim and Islamic gestures. So I was very curious to learn sort of that there is no Mane effect. So if you could just elaborate on that a little more.
So it's not that there's no Mane effect. So we have this in the additional slides here, and we talk about it in the paper. I just want to say a few quick things about Mane. So Liverpool Echo is the main local newspaper in Liverpool. And what we did is we scraped the titles from that paper. And this shows the percent of titles, percent of articles per month that talk about Salah and about Mane. The blue line is Mane, the black line is Salah. And the first thing you notice is when Salah joined, there were way more articles in the local newspaper discussing Salah than there were discussing Mane. And, like, throughout the period after Salah joined, there was much more attention to Salah. We conducted a hate crime analysis for Sadio Mane. So this is 2016 when Mane joined Liverpool. And this is, again, the exact same methods as before. And we don't really find an effect after he joined. But we actually find a similar effect using Twitter data. So it seems that Mane joining may have reduced anti-Muslim tweets among Liverpool fans. So we do find an effect. Again, if I'm back to speculating, you know, like, Salah is Arab. His name is Muhammad. So he's praying. His wife is often seen wearing hijab. His daughter is called Mecca. So these things make it much clearer that he's Muslim. The other thing is the songs that Liverpool fans have. So like the song I showed earlier or some other songs, they tend to focus on Salah being Muslim. So for some reason, like people tend to think Salah being Muslim and connecting him to Muslims. They seem to think more of that than of Mane for some reason. And it's possibly that he's Arab, that his name is Muhammad or something like that. And that's why we think we're finding more of an effect for Salah at least than for Mane, especially when it comes to hate crimes.
Great, thank you, Allah. And building off Liverpool's success, we have a question from Steve Martin, and Steve writes, I wonder, is it simply the fact that Liverpool have performed really well over the last couple of years that has led to greater happiness among supporters, so much so that they haven't had time or inclination to spend energy on being anti-Muslim? Obviously, that's a part of the contact hypothesis, but I was wondering if you could, do you think that's a big factor?
Maybe. So this is something we thought about, and we also talked about in the paper. So if Liverpool fans are generally happy, then you might expect a general decrease in all crimes in Liverpool because they're happy. So we also conducted an analysis of this. So the UK Home Office has like some of these crime categories, basically like 14 other crime categories, and we examined the effect of Salah on these crimes. And if this happiness hypothesis is true, then we should expect that all, or at least most of these crimes to decrease after Salah joins Liverpool. So this shows the average treatment effect for the treated for all of these hate crimes. The red line here is hate crimes, and then these are all the other crime categories. And what we're really finding here is that one that consistently decreases after Salah join is hate crimes, which is affected by Salah. Salah, if the happiness hypothesis is true, then we should expect basically all of those, or at least most of those, to go down consistently. But we don't really find this. So this is all like hate crimes in Merseyside compared to like a similar control group essentially, and like other crime categories in Merseyside compared to a similar control group, and we don't find them consistently decreasing. So we think it's reducing prejudice as opposed to like this happiness hypothesis.
So our next question feeds off this a little bit from Samuel Sisse. And Samuel writes, is there data that has been able to prove the contrary of the Salah effect? For example, that hate crimes can increase due to the media coverage of a player?
That's an excellent question. That's a really good question. I would need to think more about like the availability of such data. I haven't seen studies on that. But this is a really great question and a really great research topic, honestly. But yeah, I'm sorry, I cannot answer it. I would need to think more about how to design a research on this.
Great. Our next question comes from Joan Marcel Mizia, and Joan writes, when you say hate crimes, do you count more than acts of Islamophobia?
So we were hoping to do that. When we filed the Freedom of Information requests, we asked for hate crimes and Islamophobic crimes, and most jurisdictions do not collect data on Islamophobic crimes, or at least did not for like that period. So we weren't able to do it with Islamophobic crimes. So we look at hate crimes generally. This is like unfortunate. We were hoping to only focus on Islamophobic crimes, but we could not. But note that if anything, this would bias against finding an effect when you're expanding it to hate crimes more generally, because like there should be some hate crimes that are not affected by Salah that are included in this category, and so this should make it harder for us to find an effect. So, and yet we're still finding an effect. So if anything, the effect, basically should be the same size or potentially even larger for Islamophobic crimes.
Great, thank you, Joan, for your question. Thank you for Allah for the answer. One thing I'm curious about, and I know we've discussed this on a separate call, Allah, but the audience might be interested. How did you come about undertaking this research? Obviously, you're a football fan. This is something you're interested in. You work for the Immigration Policy Lab. There is a certain level of overlap. But why did you guys pick up this piece of research? And how did you time it to come out with the Champions League final?
So the research, we actually started to think about it when we saw that song. Like, yeah, when we just saw Liverpool fans making these chants, if he scores another few, I'll be Muslim too. We had a conversation and we decided to do this research. Like that song is really cool, but it's not something we expect. And we're soccer fans. We decided to do this research. It was like a really fun project to do. We started doing this research last season. So as I mentioned, we filed the Freedom of Information request in April 2018. And we've been working on it for a long time. Like if you look at the actual paper, it's like 30 pages plus 50 pages of like robustness checks and so on in the appendix. So it took us a long time to do this. It's been more or less ready. It's like really hard for us academics. And I mean, many of you can probably sympathize. Like it's hard to like finish things. There are a million things going on. So it's been sort of ready for a few months. And when Liverpool reached I believe the semi-final, we decided to finish up things really quickly, but like also try to see if Liverpool reaches the final, and so to try to time it with the final. And we thought, this would probably bring more attention to this research. So it's been ready for a while, but more or less ready. It had to, we had to make some changes, and then we decided to wait for the final to do that.
Great, thank you, Alaa. Our next question or comment comes from Ashraf Hamad. And Ash writes, thank you for the presentation. I'm curious if any of your Twitter data from the feeds of supporters from other clubs that you observed had a noticeable change in Islamophobic tweets.
Can you please explain the question?
So I think what Ash is trying to get at here is obviously there was a reduction in the amount of Islamophobic tweets from Liverpool fans, but what were the trends you were seeing from other clubs? Did they experience general reductions as well? Were there some clubs that weren't affected by Mohamed Salah?
So I can't remember the data. If I remember correctly, I think like anti-Muslim tweets and hate crimes in general in the UK also, I think they were increasing for this period. And part of the reason is shortly before Salah joined, there were bombings in Manchester and in London, and this seemed to correlate with an increase in Islamophobia. So we also heard this from anecdotal evidence, from some people living in Liverpool. There was a general increase in Islamophobia across the UK, and then when Salah arrived to Liverpool, some people said they felt much more comfortable. People were much nicer to them, like if you're wearing hijab, for example, or something like that. But if I remember correctly, the trends generally were essentially becoming worse, and in Merseyside, they improved a bit to what they would have been.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and you'd wonder, seeing a rival player doing so well, do you hate them more if they play for a team that you despise? So I think like one of the potential areas of future research is looking at the pre-Salah era, the Salah era, and then the post-Salah effect, and to see what level of hate crimes and Islamophobia persists or increases or decreases when Salah is not there anymore. And another comment comes from Joan again, who said it'd be great to have a comparison to how the Germans treated Mesut Ozil during the World Cup, which led to Ozil tweeting that when you win, you're German; when you lose, you're an immigrant. I think that'll be a fascinating study. We have a question from Steve Martin again, and Steve writes, have you been able to contrast hate crimes regarding Islamophobia versus hate crimes and homosexuality in the UK? As you know, the subject of football or homosexuality has risen during the last few years, and it'll be interesting to know if there was a contrast.
Okay, so on just very quickly to follow up on the Ozil point, I think this definitely would be a fascinating study, and it really relates to what I mentioned earlier, which is like the effect of media and media coverage on on people. So like this is exactly what Ozil seems to be talking about, and I believe Lukaku also had like written something similar before. When it comes to comparing hate crimes related to Islamophobia versus like sexuality or sexual orientation, so unfortunately the data for most police jurisdictions did not allow us to do this. Like there were very few that seemed to record a specific category within hate crimes, and we weren't able to conduct an analysis of those. There were just very few of them.
Great, thank you, Allah. Our next question comes from Search for Common Ground's very own Brad Fondak. So Brad writes, you mentioned in the paper that the number of anti-Muslim tweets and hate crimes are quite rare. What does a 20% reduction mean in real terms?
So this is correct. This is like a relatively rare phenomenon, which is, all the more reason why we were surprised to find an effect. Sorry. So the scale here is basically the annualized hate crime rate. So essentially, basically like per 1,000 residents, like annually. So in terms of like actual observable effect, like we still were able to find one, but like it's probably not that huge in terms of like absolute numbers. But the thing is, this is also a really extreme measure. Like we're talking about hate crimes. Like this is something, that's like not likely to be that like very large in numbers anyway. So measures like Islamophobic measures that are less than hate crimes will be likely more effective, essentially. I hope that helps. Does this answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think it'll be really interesting. Obviously, this piece of research got huge coverage around the world, and I was wondering, have you had anybody from Liverpool reach out to you about this research, or any other football clubs expressing interest in understanding the effects of their players on certain behaviors?
No football clubs reached out to us about this. So we made sure we tag Mo Salah and Liverpool on Twitter, but they didn't reach to us, which honestly like was expected. Like especially Salah, like he doesn't seem like he seems like a really modest person as a player and so on. So he didn't reach out to us, and nobody did reach out to us in terms of like other like football clubs or something like that.
Great. Yeah, no, I just know I'm a Sunderland fan myself. Unfortunately, I've had years of heartbreak, years after years of heartbreak. And I'm often fascinated by sort of like Sunderland is as a traditionally a left-leaning constituency that voted for Brexit. But I'd love to know the effect of certain foreign players over the last few years and how their success or lack of success has affected views and sort of, for example, in Sunderland on these players. We have one last question I want to get for Brad, and Brad actually identifies another area of research, and he probably knows this because he's a massive Liverpool fan. But Brad writes that Salah tweeted yesterday about women's rights. Is that a further avenue for research in the months and years ahead?
I mean, so I think this definitely would be very interesting research. Like there, and you can, there are a lot of research questions that relate to this. So I'm not sure that I know exactly the tweet he was talking about, but like there was like a somewhat controversial tweet today by Salah, today or yesterday, I guess, by Salah. It would be interesting to examine like the effect of celebrities talking about women's rights and the effect of this on sexism. Another really interesting thing to do would be, as the like women's soccer is increasing popularity, and like the Women's World Cup happening now and so on, I think it would also be really interesting to examine the effect of that. So I think this is definitely a very promising area of research.
Great. Well, Allah, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate you being able to join the webinar and have a pretty open discussion with us. about your research methodology, about your approach, and your fascinating results. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure our audience did too. With our audience, thank you for joining another edition of the M&E Thursday Talks. Our success is based on your contribution and your input, and we're very grateful for your continued support. Just a note, the recording will be posted on the DME for Peace Media Gallery later today, so please return to it. Please continue the discussion in the comments and share it with your colleagues who might be interested, and if they weren't able to attend. We're going to be taking a break next week because it's a holiday here in the United States, and I could do with a break. But we'll be back in a couple weeks' time with another webinar, and we look forward to seeing you online then. Allah, thank you so much, and I look forward to being in touch in the future, and I can't wait to see what research comes next.
Thank you so much for having us and for your interest in this research. This was really fun. We really appreciate it.
Great. Take care, everyone.
Bye.